The Cold War had begun, a tense, decades-long standoff shaped by competing ideologies and a relentless struggle for dominance. As the world transitioned from the ashes of World War II, it found itself gripped by a new kind of conflict, fought not on open battlefields but in the shadows. Espionage, propaganda, and covert operations became the new weapons of war, each act threatening to tip the delicate balance of peace. One such moment came in the spring of 1960 when a U.S. spy plane piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet airspace. This dramatic incident, revealing the depths of mutual distrust, shocked both superpowers and brought the world closer to disaster. The downing of Powers' U-2 aircraft was not an isolated event, but a reflection of the Cold War's very essence. A conflict where information, secrecy, and deception blurred the line between peace and confrontation. The Cold War was not just fought in cities or on battlefields. It was waged in dark corners of espionage, secret agents, covert missions, and behind-the-scenes warfare. The world's two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, clashed not only with military might, but in a game of intelligence, manipulation, and misinformation. It was then that spies and double agents became unsung heroes, or villains in this invisible war. We dig deeper into the shadowy world of espionage, find the ideological battles that set the way nations understood one another, and how the Cold War was fueled by more than just the soldiers, but by the shadows of spies pushing their respective countries closer and closer to the precipice of war. Trust was a rare commodity, and suspicion ruled every action. And as we'll see, the results of these covert operations would shape global history in ways we're still feeling today. As the Cold War unfolded, the battleground was not only on land or in the skies, it was also within the hearts and minds of the people. Propaganda has been weaponized by both sides to promote their ideology and justify their actions while demonizing the opposite side. War by narrative became the best-spun cornerstone of the Cold War. Both superpowers fought not for allies, but for citizens' hearts and minds. Such was their strength that instruments of propaganda were as multifaceted as they were strong. Radio proved to be a very important influence on broadcasting. The United States used Voice of America, VOA, to broadcast the ideals of freedom, democracy, and capitalism, usually beaming messages into Eastern Europe to counter Soviet narratives. On the other side, the Soviet Union used Radio Moscow, projecting communism as the solution to global inequality and portraying the United States as an imperialist oppressor. These programs were not only communicated, but were designed to evoke patriotism and instill suspicion of the other. The content was just as important to the battle of the ideas as the cinema and the page. Films like The Red Menace and Invasion of the Body Snatchers were produced by studios that described communism as an underhanded threat to the American way. The Soviet Union answered with films that glorified the proletariat and focused on Western immorality. Books and pamphlets were circulated around the world to persuade intellectuals, workers, and students of their cause. Propaganda had even appeared in children's cartoons to political essays. The home was where both nations worked to censor information at will. In the United States, the Red Scare and McCarthyism forced their media and intellectuals under suspicion of un-American activities. Dissenters were often silenced or banished. The Soviet Union, too, under Stalin and then Khrushchev, policed newspapers, books, and broadcasts to ensure that only those messages aligned with the state reached the public. It was on the front foot and also on the back foot. Every side portrayed their opponent's worldview as the wrong way to live. But there and back, the Soviet press pictured capitalism as the breeding place of inequality and exploitation. The American media represented a place of darkness and an oppressive life under communism, where personal liberties simply didn't exist. The propaganda was not the front line of the Cold War, but at the very war front line. It shaped perceptions while fueling the tension that defined one era. At the core of the Cold War lay an irreconcilable clash of ideologies: capitalism and communism. Capitalism was the creed of America, with an emphasis on free markets, private ownership, and individual liberty. It continued to propagate the idea that hard work and innovation would lead to personal success and national prosperity. Instead, the Soviet Union promulgated communism, in which a classless society could own resources as a whole and distribute them equitably as well. It targeted exploitation and economic inequality as set to be defeated. Such competitive visions of the world went far beyond theoretical constructions. They determined every single policy and measure from spy networks to anti-communist propaganda throughout the Cold War. America's triumph of capitalism would mean triumph over communism, undermining Soviet influence abroad. American economic and political supremacy must fall. Capitalism was something for the Soviets as well, as they saw in it a decadent imperialistic system, since the USSR had an ethical as well as a political imperative in spreading communism. In gaining the upper hand in an ideological struggle, espionage became a necessary tool. American and Soviet spies weren't just gathering intelligence. They were stealing technological secrets, military plans, and propaganda strategies to outdo one another. Each side regarded the survival of its ideology would rely on breaking down the opposing party. Combats of ideology did not simply lie in either a political boundary or behind doorways. They had managed their way to penetrate people's very day-to-day living in either country. Thereby, fears and trust created a scenario in this chapter of the Cold War, particularly in their awareness. In the United States, fears of communism gaining traction in society prompted the Red Scare with widespread suspicion across the board. Neighbors betrayed neighbors. Questions of loyalty haunted everyone, and accusations of activities un-American took on a surreal quality. Through a culture of permanent suspicion, the citizenry of the Soviet Union remained vigilant, awaiting the inevitable capitalistic aggression and espionage. Portraying the West as an unsafe foe who would come in to undermine the lifestyle they cherished, created a collective suspicion culture for the state. This psychological warfare extended beyond the confines of the USA and USSR borders. These countries were dragged into this ideological fight, with them being coerced to join either side. For people in general, the Cold War was a battle for their beliefs, loyalty, and future. The Cold War was not just a nation's fight, but a game of shadows, the people secretly fighting against each other to outsmart the enemy. Spies hence became key characters in this Cold War by living a double life of terror and using information as the most potent weapon. Among the most notorious agents of this type was Aldrich Ames, a high-ranking CIA officer who sold secrets to the Soviet Union. In almost a decade, Ames sold the identities of U.S. operatives and critical intelligence. This sent several U.S. assets into the Soviet clutches and eventually executed. He was greedily motivated since the Soviets paid him millions of dollars, while his acts left a disastrous mark on U.S. intelligence operations. On the other side was Soviet military intelligence defector Oleg Penkovsky, who brought along vital information the United States and Britain so dearly needed during this period, important information. He was the one who told the Soviets about missile capacities during the Cuban Missile Crisis. His contribution became very vital for the strategies being shaped by the West, though his betrayal cannot be ignored either. The Soviets caught and executed him eventually, transforming him into one of the many tragic figures found in the spy world. In addition to just the war with agents, spycraft itself fueled the Cold War. Gadgets and technologies were developed and produced as if in a context that would best suit something a James Bond hero would use. Secret cameras built inside cigarette lighters, microfilm pens, and hollowed heels for the secret storage of messages inside a pair of shoes, now standard in spycraft arsenals. The most important innovation was the dead drop, through which spies could pass information to one another without making contact. They could hide things in hollowed-out trees, park benches, or even fake rocks, so nobody suspected anything. Moreover, the coded messages, sent either by radio waves or by writing in invisible ink, made it possible for agents to send and receive information undetected. Cold War spies were a lot more than just human characters. They stood for an entire era of secret, deception, and of genius. Their stories make us forget what both sides are capable of and just how far either side went to come out on top in this underground war. This was, if anything, also a war of shadows, as it was a conflict of ideologies. It is espionage and propaganda that transformed countries into a chessboard, with a spy or informant playing a significant role in an extremely perilous game. On the two sides, the struggle was more psychological than a war of politics and spread into daily life due to the constant dread and suspicion of the opposing force. Every clandestine operation and propaganda broadcast is an act in this war for supremacy globally, holding the world on its tiptoes. But the question remains, did all these spy games' uninterrupted function act as a safety valve, prevent the Cold War from bursting into open violence, or escalate the stakes to the point of rendering a whisper catastrophic?